tough it is on a Thursday evening to get down here in Long Beach. But for everyone here that don't know me, my name is Michael Tug. I'm from Intertrend Communications, which is a multicultural advertising agency located right here in downtown Long Beach. So I want to start off by thanking all of you tonight in attending this art exhibition, supporting Asian American youth, really kicking off Asian American Heritage Month. This is actually our second student art exhibition since we started our social justice initiative called Make Noise Today. This was started 3 years ago during the height of increased violence, racism against the Asian American community. Make Noise Today believes in combating racism and promoting racial equity through storytelling, representation, and sustained action. We empower and provide a platform for Asian American youth to tell their stories and amplify their voices. This exhibition is just one way for them to make noise. Thank you. This year's event is based on the topic of Asian American youth, mental health, and well-being. In addition to formally launching the exhibition this evening, we will be hosting a discussion panel to cover this very complex, important, and highly stigmatized issue for Asian Americans. By shining a light on this issue, we can start a conversation and provide support for those who need it most. But before we get started, I do want to thank our generous partners who've donated financially and/or through their time and effort to this initiative and Make Noise Today. So I'm going to have to read through this because I want to make sure I get everyone. Memorial Care, Dear Asian Americans, TeachAAPI, Willow TV, Always Be Creating, The Jarchi Show, Major League Cricket, Influential, Sabio, ODK Media, DataWorks, Admaru, Youth Against Hate, Teach for America, Parents Are Human, and of course, Long Beach Public Libraries. It's through their support we're able to provide this platform for our Asian American community. So a heartfelt thank you on behalf of them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Chief Investment Officer, Tanya Rocco, who'll talk a little about the student contest that this exhibition is based on.
We didn't plan the launch date like optimally, just because this is the AP testing week. My kid's taking 5, so we don't have the students here this year to read their essays. But I did want to start off with reading an excerpt of one that I found really insightful. So this is from Taylor N. from Chicago, a gold winner. And he's talking about his grandmother, Papa's trauma in Vietnam, and he's ethnically Chinese. And she says, speaking of the grandmother, Chinese never cry, we grateful. And she placed her hand over mine, grateful because America take care of us. And for some reason, according to Taylor, those words stuck with me. I felt like all of those suffering that I had endured in my own life was nothing, that I would never be allowed to feel pity for myself when my grandmother had already lived through 15 lifetimes of trauma, and it didn't feel fair. And Taylor's words are just really a common sentiment. We've read through 300 essays. I just feel like they don't have permission necessarily to feel life pain. So that's why this year, as Michael was saying, we decided to take the contest up a notch, and we created a focus theme called Bring the Noise, because last year when we read through all those, we noticed there was so much angst, not only like the high school day-to-day challenges, but just the massive stressors they have in applying to colleges. And at the time it was post-COVID, so there was social unrest, hate crimes, and then of course, as Taylor had mentioned, acculturation, stress, and interculturational conflict. And so what we did was we landed on this prompt saying, what does your own mental health well-being look like? I know some of you probably know and have heard some of the stats regarding Asian Americans. So for example, with youth, Asian American high school students have the highest rate of depressive symptoms among all racial and ethnic groups. Asian American teens have the highest rates of suicidal ideation and attempts among all racial and ethnic groups. And in terms of seeking help, they have Asian American teens are less likely to seek mental health services compared to their non-Asian peers, and that's really concerning. So this contest, we really wanted to invite youth to explore the well-being through emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, social wellness. And we're really proud to have received 300 plus applications and submissions representing 37 states around the US. And it just goes a testament that we really do need this platform. There's so many students opening up and sharing their fears and dreams with us. This year we also changed the format from just being written. Last year we had just essays and letters, but this year we had lyrics, poetry, we had visual artwork, so sculptures, visual art, illustrations, video, and so that was really fascinating to see some of it in our walls here and on our digital platform, the flipbook that we'll be launching. And so as we reviewed, our team really, from Make Noise Today, carefully looked at all the creative submissions, and this was always the best part and most meaningful because there's just young, talented artists, they're creative, they're intimate, raw, and honest. And some of the themes that we saw highlighted a lot of family, of course, just the complexity of it, delving into the generations of sacrifice and expectations thrust upon them. And we were so moved by the many personal mental health journeys that we heard. Some of them did touch on some of the darkness, but a lot of just also new discoveries that they talked about in terms of love and meaning and finding purpose and liberation through their journeys. And so we do definitely think it's a privilege to hear their stories and courage, and we really thank all of the submission applicants for allowing us to shine a light on mental wellness. So in terms of judging, after narrowing it down and handing off the finalists to some of our judges, they graded it on a rubric of creativity, voice, unique ideas. And so we want to thank our judges. Tommy Chang here in the front row here is a lifetime of being entrenched and committed to improving education. He's now the CEO of the New Teacher Center, former consultant to school system leaders, and the former superintendent of Boston Public Schools. So thank you. Two other judges are not here. Anthony Ocampo, he's a professor of sociology at Cal Poly Pomona and author of several books, including How the Latinos of Asia, How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race, and Brown and Gay in LA. And then we had an artist, Jocelyn Tsai, a prominent Asian American painter, illustrator, and muralist who explores the journey of multiple cultures. And then we have a great panel lined up to explore the themes of mental wellness in our community. Our moderator, we had Jerry Wan, if you looked at the agenda earlier, and unfortunately, for us a few days ago, he got called to duty from Kamala Harris herself and the Biden administration. So he's going to be off doing some important work, hopefully, for the betterment of our country. We will miss him, but we are going to have our panelist and moderator, Yi-Ann Lee. And I wanted to introduce her. So she is the co-founder of Dear Asian Youth, the USC campus. And the Dear Asian Youth is an organization that we discovered several years ago, founded by high schoolers, really motivated, proactive high schoolers. So it's a youth-led or global organization that promotes intersectional activism, solidarity with other marginalized communities, equality and equity. And they have a digital platform, grassroots organizing, and community-based advocacy, and a space to share stories, and they're really impressive. Yi-Ann Lee is now a third year at USC, co-president of the USC chapter of Dear Asian Youth, a research lab assistant at USC's Race, Disparities, and Intervention Lab, and an independent writer and poet. So we want to welcome Yi-Ann Lee.
Should I speak at the speak at the mic? Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. Wow. This is hard. Does this work? Doesn't that work? Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming here today. As we just heard, this is a beautiful exhibition with a lot of submissions on art and writing on the AAPI youth mental health and well-being. And we had submissions from, I think, over 35 states, if that's correct. So we just wanted to bring some of the topics and themes from our submissions into our panel discussion. So if our panelists wanted to maybe go around and introduce themselves really quickly, you all have heard about me already, so you can go down the line.
Okay. My name is Dr. Yuana Pao, and I'm sorry, I can't see everybody. I just see the sun, which is beautiful. I'm just gonna stare in the middle. I am a clinical psychologist at Memorial Care, Miller Children's and Women's Hospital at an outpatient clinic. I am very honored and pleased to be here to support and collaborate on this amazing opportunity for youth, an amazing opportunity to speak and to support anybody who wants to take action. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Millie Liao, and I am a high school senior at LA County High School for the Arts, but I'm also a youth intern at Make Noise Today. This is like my third year? Oh my gosh, time flies. A while now, and I'm really excited to get to put together this event, and it's our second year doing this. I love looking at all of the art and just in general, super excited to be here to talk about AAPI teen issues and be an AAPI teen. Yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Serena Minikis, and I am first and foremost a mother of 3. I have a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and I'm a founding board member of TeachAAPI. We are a group of really passionate parents based in Los Angeles, but we are hoping to make impact across this country to really change the conversation and bring Asian Americans into representation in our schools. Yeah. I think that's everything.
All right, yeah, beautiful, thank you. So let's just get started. So I think, first of all, we all come from very different generational groups. So coming from all different generations as Asian Americans, maybe we can all talk a little bit about our experiences growing up in an immigrant household and just start off there.
I can actually contribute to that
Okay,
too.
go ahead.
I am originally from Romania, and I actually came here when I was 12. So growing up in a household where I had to learn English, maybe not representative of the AAPI community, but it was definitely something that I had to adjust to. And it came with its own set of problems, and maybe some of it had to do just with language barriers, but also had to do with cultural barriers. So I think for me, what was really important growing up in a family who emigrated here was the support I had from my mother mostly, and the opportunity to go home and vent about whatever was bothering me. So I credit my mother for, I guess, me choosing to become a psychologist, because she definitely encouraged talking.
I'm very similar. Coming from an immigrant household, I think I grew up really, I guess, worried and constantly nervous about what it meant to be Asian American. It was definitely something that I thought about way too often for being like a 12-year-old. And I think that as we're growing up as Gen Z, especially Asian American youth right now, have to come to terms with race and these complex issues and what race means in the context of a place like the US when they're growing up at much younger ages, because when we come from an immigrant household, oftentimes that isn't a conversation that's being held or a conversation that's talked about because our parents did grow up in a different country. So I think it was difficult for me to come to terms with who I was as an Asian American, and I oftentimes felt sort of isolated or alienated because of my race and had a lot of struggles growing up in a very predominantly white area. I think I also experienced a lot of things that made me sort of scared about talking about these issues, but I'm also really lucky in that I've also had really supportive parents and a wonderful supportive system within my family to talk about these issues. And once I was able to sort of come to terms with the fact that this is an issue that I have to talk about and to confront as an Asian American, and recognizing that part of my identity isn't just something that hurts me or harms me, but something that I can also cherish and find joy in, I think that's when I started to realize the beauty of it. My
experience is similar, but like back a generation, and I was very curious to hear answers today, and it brings me so much hope and joy to hear that, because I think one of the things that's common with my experience is the feeling of being different, and I think most people can relate to that at some point. But being different when you're younger, you're already wanting to just fit in. And that idea of fitting in and trying to fit in is accentuated when you are obviously different from everybody else. And I think that theme, complemented with the fact that my parents are immigrants and their, mode is a little bit more survival. Like it's a survival strategy to fit in and to kind of adapt. And I think that desire to fit in kind of was a theme through most of my life, younger definitely, and that's great. It was a path that helped me, but I think it also, today's topic is mental health. It was hard to really understand who I was, because I was never really listening to, who am I? It was more like, what should I do? What is, how do I fit in? How do I, versus who am I and how do I belong and how do I know who I am so I can have that home? And I think that in growing up in an immigrant household, everything is accentuated. You have big emotions when you're a young child, period. And adolescence is big emotions. But when you're in an immigrant household, those big emotions are magnified, because you're also seeing pretty impactful things like how other people treat your parents. Like if they're being belittled or if they're not being treated as equal, that is something that is such a big emotion. And my experience, I don't know if this was yours, was that we didn't necessarily have, we had a lot of love and it was never a question. We didn't have the language or the communication to be able to process those emotions. And I think that was a piece that really, I think hindered, not like in a critical way, but that was definitely an impact. And I think that's a lot of my focus on the work that I do with my children, with our organization, in the world.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to all of these experiences we've all kind of mentioned so far, but my first half, I've kind of lived both sides of the coin. I think my first half of my childhood, I lived in a very Asian-heavy community that had a lot of Asian immigrants, and so when I was a lot younger, I was surrounded by a lot of classmates who kind of looked just like me, and we all had the same study habits, we had the same extracurriculars, we studied the same things, we were interested in very similar things, we talked about this, we brought the same food to school every day for lunch, and we even celebrated the same traditions and holidays, and so I was not very cognizant of my race and how that impacted my identity until I was around my middle school years, and then my family moved, we moved around a lot, but we moved to a very predominantly white community, and that was when I was kind of hit with this culture shock, because suddenly I was surrounded by people who didn't look like me. I was one of very few Asian students in my community, and then I became very hyper conscious of what I looked like, what I sounded like, what my parents sounded like around the people in our community, and that's when I really started kind of realizing how race became a much bigger impact in how I was experiencing the world, how I was sort of forming my own self-identity, how I perceived myself. And also that really changed my relationship with my parents when I think I went through that period of time that a lot of young people do, where you sort of have that conflict where you want to reject the Asian part of yourself to try to fit in. And I didn't want to bring my mom's food to school anymore. I really tried very hard to repress that side of my identity. And this is a little bit embarrassing to share, but it wasn't really until the pandemic kind of hit and we started seeing the rise in hate crimes and Asian hate when I really started kind of accepting and just became more accepting of that part of my identity. I started realizing that I could really lean into that side of my identity, of my background, of my family's background, and really become more, let myself be proud of that being a part of who I am instead of trying to just repress it so hard. And that's, I think, a very long process for a lot of people, no matter what generation you're kind of coming from.
And brave. Definitely, especially in the midst of all that.
Yes, and it's still, I think, it's still something, that I'm still dealing with, and I think a lot of youth, like Millie, you can probably speak on this, you still deal with that every day. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's interesting to even see the generational cycles that just continue, even though we're so different and times have changed. When I talk to people who are generations older than me, they also had the same issue of not wanting to bring this smelly lunchbox full of Asian food to school. And I was like, wow, that's something that I can so relate to and just like understand, because that's exactly what I experienced. And a lot of these generational cycles of trauma when it comes to like having immigrant parents and being the first generation to really grow up here are repeated, and things that like sort of we've never really had the tools to deal with until now, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think the whole thing with the cycles and how, you know, our parents are, we also become cognizant of the struggles our parents are going through. And I remember when I was younger, I had classmates who would make fun of my parents' accents. And that's, I kind of, at the time, it was obviously very embarrassing, and I kind of like shrunk into a hole. I felt really ashamed. I think it's a very common reaction. And then eventually, you know, after being, I mean, I'm very lucky to have a very strong support system of, you know, peers, family members who are supportive, who I was able to lean into as I was going through the process of coming to terms with my identity. But I was lucky enough to be able to kind of use that as a motivator, as a sort of source of, ooh, can you hear? Can everybody, is this not working? Hello?
Okay.
Is it not working?
We're going to try to use that mic just so they can hear back there. Sorry. Thank you. Just, pass it around.
How much is that? Is this working? Is it working? Okay, beautiful. Where was I? Oh yes, about the accents. And so,
There we go. Yeah, that's great.
wow, y'all can hear me now. Okay, and so I was able to use that moment as sort of a motivator moving forward. And I think I read about this in a book called Minor Feelings by Kathy Parpong. It's a very, very, very great book, beautiful book about the Asian American experience, where she writes about how she eventually used writing as a tool to judge the people who were judging her parents and their broken English while she was growing up, as a way to kind of say, like, I've been here the whole time and I have been watching, and now I'm writing these beautiful words to prove that we've been here all along and that we are not invisible. And I'm now an English literature major, and I like to think that it's because I really just like books and reading, but a small part of that definitely came from this desire, and out of obviously spite, to prove the people who, when I was younger, were making fun of my accent and my parents' accents, that, you know, we're not invisible. So, and, but I think a lot of that definitely has impacted the ways that I view mental health, the ways that my parents viewed the issue of mental health, when so many young people in our community do deal with mental health issues. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the, from your guys' point of view and your experience, the prevalence of mental health issues in your circles and community, and what are some tools that can be used to address that, or why you think mental health is such a stigmatized topic in our community.
So I'll speak in terms of my community where I live, and also my community as a mental health provider. In my community, I live in a very mixed neighborhood where it's pretty much every color, every culture that you can think of, and I think it's beautiful sometimes to just have that as a reminder that you're not alone and that everybody's dealing with same things but viewing them through different lenses sometimes. As a member of my mental health community, in terms of what I do dealing with mental health on a daily basis, I feel like sometimes I need to step away from that to really understand what's going on. So it doesn't really boil down to just Asian American patients or clients or just Hispanic or anything like that. It's more about, are you generalizing? Are you able to really look at the actual issue and look at specifics in the family so you can offer what really works for that family? Because not just because we have Asian American community, right? There's Filipino, there's Korean, there's Japanese, there are all these different flavors, right? Where we need to kind of think about what does that mean? So stepping away in terms of that, it brings me clarity in terms of, yes, you are Korean, your family was Korean, or you're a mixed family, right? But that doesn't mean that what works for one Korean family is gonna work for all Korean families, right? So the level of communication needs to start with that, how we perceive what's really wrong and how we really are open to what is working, because obviously there are a lot of households where things are working and we just need to multiply that, right? So I think it really varies, and we need to pay attention to not just differences between Asian American and white culture, but also within the Asian American culture, what's working, how do we use this platform or similar platforms to really bring awareness to how those who are doing it, right, how they can teach others and show that it's not that hard. You just have to open that way of communication, and you have to sit down, listen, invite over, my mom used to do it over ice cream, so that was me and my mom, but it could be done over working out, going for a walk. It could be multiple ways of relating. So I think that's what we need to remember.
I think just speaking from like the perspective of an Asian American youth, a lot of the mental health issues I think that I've faced, I've had a difficult time to sort of open up and talk about, because I've always sort of viewed it as something that I just have to get through myself. I think for a lot of us, sometimes it's something that we feel like we just sort of have to keep within ourselves and not share with other people. I think that maybe it's a part of like a cultural norm in a way, because a lot of, for me personally, like my experience coming from like an immigrant household is that I feel like I want to, like my responsibility as someone who comes from immigrant parents who worked so hard and spent their life to be able to build this future for me in the US, I need to sort of also bring that same energy and build a life for myself and show them that I'm capable and that I'm doing things and that I'm taking what I have and making use of it and sort of I guess living up to the greater standard of what it means to be like an immigrant's child. And I think this isn't just me, this is like a very widespread experience for a lot of my friends who do have immigrant parents. And I think even like just within friend groups, like for Asian American youth, it's hard for us to talk about these issues and to say, hey, I'm having a hard time, or hey, I'm struggling with this and that, because of these sort of cultural norms that force us to think, oh, this is a competition, or this is something that I can't share with people, or this is going to be embarrassing for me to share. I will say that like I started my school's Asian American like affinity group or AAPI Lions Club, and just within this 1 year, like when we do have events about mental health and about like all these sort of traumatic events that have occurred for our community in these past few years, from the Stop Asian Hate movement in response to the anti-Asian hate crimes, and also just what just passed with like the Lunar New Year shootings in Monterey Park, which is literally right within our community. A lot of Asian American teens were struggling with how to talk about these issues, with how they sort of affected them, but not really knowing how to talk about them was really hard. And when we had like, I guess, sort of just spaces and decompression areas to talk about mental health and just to do check-ins, I think that was something that a lot of students had never experienced before. Like they had never had the chance to just sit down and talk about how they're feeling. I know that like there's always this thing with Asian teens, and we're always like doing so much. Like all of my friends are like pianists and mathematicians and and they do like 5 different extracurriculars, and we're all just so amazing in all different ways. And I think that's definitely just a part of Asian excellence. But when we talk about taking space to talk about how we feel and how we're doing, I think that's a very important part of, I guess, just honoring who we are in that way. Yeah.
I think that some of what Tanya spoke about when she introduced this whole panel really, to me, exemplifies some of why it's stigmatized, why mental health is stigmatized in the Asian communities. I think the idea that anything that I'm feeling is not going to live up to somebody who turned up their whole entire life, moved their family across the ocean, and who knows how they got here. So these feelings must be diminished. And I think a lot of us felt that during the pandemic. It's fresher, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I have so much, I shouldn't feel bad. It's nothing compared to people who have lost their whole family, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that mental health, that kind of having that framework is a big piece of about why it's stigmatized. I think there's also the piece in Asian families about saving face and like not making your family look bad. I think these are different things that inform, but that's my perspective on why. In terms of what I see, I see a lot of children. They're not all Asian. There's definitely a lot of excellence, period, across all the different children. And I think the way we raise children today, what we expect of them is a lot. And I think that we, as parents, as peers, need to remember these are people. People make mistakes. People aren't perfect, and we all bring a special gift into the world. And I think that piece of it, of just understanding and not holding people to impossible standards. I think that's a big piece of it. I think that what I see at the mental health, and there's a lot of mental health concerns with the youth in my area, certainly. A lot of it is this expectation of being perfect and not letting the cracks show. And I think that's kind of.
I want to add something. Given all this excellence and it could be pressure, it could be need, it could be strife.
I'll turn it down, but hold it.
Okay. The need to meet expectations, to do something out of spite and do it well, right? All those things are great. I think we also need to consider the fact that is what is leading sometimes to a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of isolation, or doing things without telling our family members that it's not easy. We're doing it, but it's not easy, right? Okay. And I think we need to remember that if you have groups where you can talk about all those things and you can make that stepping stone to talking to your family about what's really wrong or how well you're doing and how much you enjoy reading what books and discuss those books, I think that's what we need. Because in spite of everybody who's doing well, their statistics still speak to how little help Asian American families seek, how little they think about stepping out of the comfort zone or just about not making the wrong move or saying the wrong thing when they're making that first step, which is very important. Acknowledging that you need help or that there's something or someone, it doesn't have to be therapy, but there's something out there besides your household or besides your close group of friends or family who can maybe provide a different perspective. That's what we need to remember and raise in terms of our voice, because it's not one thing and it's not therapy. It could be a club at school, could be writing a book, could be all these different things.
I think when we're talking about this this need for getting help or taking up space, a conversation that I have not heard a lot that I think I wish I could hear a little bit more about is these fundamental differences between Eastern and Western culture that I think really inform the ways that we view mental health in the AAPI community. I've talked about this with some of my friends and I've read a little bit about it. I'm not a sociologist by any means, but it's something, if anyone here is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but something that I've kind of read about and realized as I got older is that the difference between Eastern and Western cultures, which is really what is kind of at the core of the gap between younger and older generations in our community, is the difference between collectivism and individualism. And I think a lot of Western cultures are very rooted in individualism. Things like meritocracies, chasing your passion, achievements. Whereas in Eastern cultures, a lot of those cultures are built on collectivism, which is the idea that the entire community, your family, is everyone's responsibility, and we are all here to take care of each other. And there are obviously great sides that come from both. There's a reason why we, and the AAPI community, are so loyal to our families, how much love we have for each other, how diligent, how resilient we are. But that kind of difference in collectivism versus individualism, I think, is what kind of comes into play a little bit when people in our community have issues or really struggle with speaking up, because now that's kind of where the concept of saving face comes in. You're afraid to rock the boat. You're afraid that you're burdening someone else by speaking up about your problems. And this gap, I felt this gap and this divide very starkly when I was growing up. And I think, everyone on this panel has spoken on this already, which is, feeling afraid to speak up or afraid to take that first step to seek help. So maybe we can talk about that generational divide and how that relates to mental health and seeking help, speaking up. I know, Millie, you and I are of the younger generation, so we can maybe speak a little bit about the divide between us and our parents in the older generation. But I mean, Dr. Powell and Serena, if you guys have anything you want to add to as like a parent or as someone who is a provider of care, definitely feel free to jump in as well.
I can start. I think that I've done a lot of thinking about the generational gap because I think that it's definitely something that is really important and an issue that's not talked about enough, especially within Asian American communities, because of what Ian was just talking about, sort of this feeling of like when we're family, we're all this together. I think it's hard to recognize the differences within a family when we feel like we need to always be together, always be rooting for each other, always be united in this sort of way. It's hard to recognize that we're different people and that our experiences are very different. I will say that, like, for me, what I've seen in a lot of immigrant households, and definitely in my own, is sort of the differences in the hardships that sort of my parents went through and in the hardships that I go through. Not saying that one is more heavy than the other, or not saying that one is more hard than the other, but having parents who did move literally, like Serena said, across an ocean and sacrifice a lot of their lives in order to sort of build up a new life here in the US. I think, like she said, it's been hard to think about my struggles and not compare them to how my parents grew up and how they also experienced a lot of hardships. And I think that when we talk about bridging a gap, mental health is one of those big things where there's a huge gap, because for youth, we have a lot of issues surrounding mental health. And like Tanya said, with all those statistics earlier, clearly this is a very prevalent issue within my generation and within my community. But because we sort of have this pressure coming from, I guess, all different sides, and especially just from outside of us, we feel like we can't speak about it, or we can't really talk about it out loud because it's something that maybe we won't necessarily be acknowledged for. It's something that isn't a real issue sometimes to people. And I know of friends whose parents don't recognize mental health as an issue and don't recognize it as something that's an actual struggle because of, the sort of cultural differences. And sort of the fact that maybe they had difficulty just bringing food to the table when they were younger. So when they think about, oh, you're struggling because of depression, they're like, oh, that's not necessarily as hard as what I've experienced. And I think that's a huge sort of, in terms of generational gap that I've seen. And I think that the number one thing that comes with that is just empathy. Like, for me, it's been really important to show my friends that when we come to understand each other from a place of like wanting to hear about each other's stories and wanting to listen, but also sort of stating that we're different people and acknowledging that. That's a huge part of empathy that nobody ever talks about, because it's not putting yourself in the other person's shoes entirely. It's knowing that you're different and that you come from a different experience, and that growing up in the US makes you different from your parents, but you can still sort of listen to their stories and be like, hey, I'm sorry, that's hard, and I understand that. And while I may not be able to have fully experienced that and went through that, I can also show you that that's meaningful to me. But also asking your parents, hey, I want you to listen to what I have to say, and not to dismiss it or to say that it's not important, but also to say, hey, I see that, I understand that.
Thank you for sharing. It's really helpful to hear a lot of this, and I think in listening to you, it's also this idea of if you are a young person and you are trying to convince this parent of yours that your struggles are real, and that that we don't need to compare struggles. It's not like a competition. But I think trying to focus on the pieces that they also care about. They also care about your well-being. They want you to do well, and expressing, look, these are my struggles, and it feels just as big as leaving, as turning your life upside down, and trying to connect. And I think that the piece as a parent who is trying to break cycles and to try things differently is, if you can't find that with your parent, or if you can't break through in the channels that you have, to reach out, to look around and look for helpers. There are other people who are trying, whether it's peers or other people that mental health experts or just mentors. I think that there are people out there and there's more conversation happening today, and I think that is where that hope can be found. But I think that your comment about Western and Eastern kind of cultural fundamentals, I think the big piece about Asian American is that you find yourself often in the center of that, and you are brought up in one world, but you're trying to function in another world. And I think that can be isolating, because not only are you trying to function and succeed in this Western kind of collective, but you have these like tools that you've been taught that are different, and that probably lends itself to why those stats are so sad, and why when we talk about it as humans together, we can help people draw the connection and to like hopefully have more people speak, because sometimes all you have to do is to say those words out loud to somebody.
I'm gonna add something. Just speaking in terms of the Eastern, Western, traditional, non-traditional, obviously we can talk forever about those things. I think it's important in terms of generation to define what doing well means, what depression means, what hard means, because I think if we come to a common definition, then we can start talking and maybe comparing if it isn't more difficult. It's different, right? And also the other piece in terms of Eastern, Western, I think if a lot of people in the community think of therapy as Western, 100%, we're not gonna get those numbers improved. We're still gonna have 3 times as likely to seek therapy in the Asian community. What we need is to understand what's needed and take a little and give a little, right? So a lot of research out there says the people who are actually seeking therapy in this community are the people who are going to non-traditional therapy, or therapists who are willing to adapt other measures like meditation, beginning with that, or doing other strategies in therapy in the context of seeking help, but listening to who your client is and what their definition of a struggle is and what they're saying is needed, or how they talk. So the language, I'm not talking about Korean, I'm not talking Khmer, I'm talking about language in terms of communication and approachability and what's needed to actually get the conversation started. So we need different language that bridges Eastern and Western in whatever setting.
And just to quickly add on to that, I mean, even when we're talking about like parents talking to kids, for a lot of us, like who are Asian American youth, we have parents whose first language isn't English. So when we try to have like difficult conversations, it can be hard and it can be difficult to even bridge that beginning language barrier. But I think that makes what Dr. Pao was saying even more profound, like finding a language that doesn't necessarily have to reside in like actual language, but what's your common definition for I'm struggling, I'm going through a hard time, and what's your definition for that? I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think, when we're having those first conversations with parents, I know that, therapy or counseling or any kind of outside of the family help is not something that's always easily accessible, whether that's like objectively and realistically accessible or, mentally accessible. Having those kinds of first conversations with the parentals about, what it is that you need, or if you're struggling, can be very, very difficult when the concept of mental health may not be something that they're even very familiar with. And I think we were talking earlier about like language barriers, and just, something that I've learned to have to do when I'm talking with my parents about these kinds of difficult topics is really establishing like definitions and establishing what it is that I want from them, what it is that I need from them, because learning about my parents' kind of history and their life story was what really helped me to understand what was causing such a big divide in their generation versus mine. And so now when I communicate with them, I kind of like to tell them like, hey mom or hey dad, I'm going to rant about something. And what I want you to do at the end of it is either to give me advice, or I don't want advice, I just want you to give me a hug, or just, I don't want any of that, I just want you to say that everything's going to be okay. And that has been kind of a small first step that's been really helpful with bridging conversations about mental health when the definition of like what does it mean to seek therapy or to seek help is not really clearly defined within different family units.
But you found it. Absolutely. And it's boundaries too.
Absolutely.
It's
yes.
saying what you need and what you don't need.
She's saying boundaries are also important. Okay, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, we have one more.
One more? Okay, let's do one more question. So, we had so many questions, but
It's a big topic.
yeah, it's a long topic. Let's go with one more. What advice would everybody here on the panel give to other Asian American youth who kind of face the same challenges with mental health or with communicating with their parents, with dealing with generational divides, etc.?
I would say keep doing what you're doing, especially with this type of platform. Collaborate, I think that's a big one. Sometimes stepping away from that comfort zone, stepping away from your neighborhood can give you a different perspective, and it can really show you, hey, it worked for them, let's try it. Or finding out, what the boundaries or the language you're using. And I think the only way you can do that is to become a little uncomfortable and try it. It might not work the first time, it might not work the seventh time, but it will work if you are persistent and you're always considering what you're learning and how you're growing from each experience. So I feel no matter what or where you go or what degree you have, you can't stop. You have to continuously think, there's more out there. There's more I can learn about myself. There's more that I can do to help others. And I think the only way we can do that is we lean on each other. So not necessarily in terms of like a Western mentality, but really trying to lean on each other to learn, to experience, and to move it forward, right, for the next generations as well.
So I'm going to end this with a little story. I have a friend, and she really wanted to get a piercing. And not just any piercing, a septum. So if you guys know what a septum is, it's like a really, really big like nose piercing right here. Definitely not what I definitely something that I know my mom would not want me to get. If I showed up home, she would be like, oh my gosh, what is that? But that being said, my friend is also Asian, and obviously her mom was not good for this. She did not want this at all. She was like, absolutely not. And so she told me this issue, and she was sort of complaining to me about it and all of the sort of nuances of it and how sort of having her septum pierced was going to help her with self-expression, and it was like very important to her. And I was like, okay, let me see, like what do you want from me from this? And she's like, maybe because we're really close family friends, maybe you can go talk to my mom and tell her sort of how I'm feeling. Because every time we talk about this, we always just end up arguing and yelling and complaining, and then it ends up like a big mess where we talk about a bunch of other things that don't relate. And so at like the next sort of gathering, I just ended up talking to her mom about this, and sort of just like we had like a casual conversation about it, and I found out that her mom wasn't super against it. She just she wanted to make sure that her daughter was being responsible, and that it actually was something that she was willing to deal with for the rest of her life, and have that. And I think that like from this conversation, I realized that maybe when it comes to like having empathy, and it's like when it comes to having hard conversations with your parents in specific as Asian American youth, what we need to do, like the first step, is just like consider finding affinity and asking other people that maybe aren't our parents, like, hey, how do you think I should approach this? Or even just looking from a different perspective can help. I think that like when I talk to another person's parent, this sort of distance between us that wasn't like, oh, we're a family, we have to think the same thing, we have to do the same thing, helped us to sort of actually have a closer conversation and a more objective conversation, rather than be sort of barricaded by our feelings of, oh, I can't tell my mom this because that's awkward, or oh, I can't complain about this, but rather just having an objective conversation with this person who's an entirely different generation from me was actually really enlightening and helpful. And I think that sometimes when we I guess just take that first step and reach out to people, find affinity, find people that sort of mirror our experiences, like good mentors in life are so great as well, like people that you can look up to. That can be one great step to sort of starting to talk about mental health and to opening up about that.
I have so much hope listening to both of you and to you, Dr. Powell.
Hold the microphone. Hold the microphone.
Okay, I'm really bad at microphones. Okay, I was just saying I have so much hope listening to both of you and your story about your parents and just saying, this is what I need. Like, that's something anyone can understand, and if my child is telling me they need something, I'm gonna listen. And that's really powerful because you had those tools and you taught them through just conversation. And that, exactly, like just talking and reaching out and taking a risk and doing it again if it fails and not giving up. I think that what the immigrant generation really gives is like this kind of survival and this like ability to succeed, and this is the kind of baseline. And I think that what we're all striving for now is kind of the next step, which is mental health and the ability to thrive and to be better than just surviving, which is important, but also we can do better. And I think that, you know, when we try to have those conversations or we're trying to teach each other how to validate feelings, big feelings, that's all sometimes those feelings need. If we are, you know, my advice, this is your question, or advice or insight is that if you're not able to break through and you're failing and you need it because you are in a place where you need to find that validation, you know, sometimes you gotta be strong and just do it for yourself. So validate yourself, like change that internal talk and read. Sometimes there's a lot of self-help books out there, a lot of videos, there's so much now available that therapy is, you know, the right kind of site. There's a lot of people out there that are talking about things that if you can find something to relate to, that brings that same sense of relief that somebody in crisis might really find valuable. So that's my...
I just want to add to what you're saying also, therapy could be anything. Those drawings, those videos, those submissions, those are all therapeutic outlets for those students who have probably paced, sat around, erased, retyped, retaken, whatever, until the final product was something they were happy with, right? So I think it's yes, try, succeed, fail, you know, try again. But I think we also have to remember, it kind of goes back to like the Eastern-Western divides, generational gaps, cultural gaps, language gaps. We need to understand that there's not just one solution. There's not just therapy or just one type of therapy. I mean, there's music therapy, there's, you know, meditation, mindfulness exercises that can be done. There's behavioral therapy, there's play therapy, depending on age, right? You don't want to be 20 and doing play therapy. But there's so many things out there, and I think if we just think it's all in a box, we're going to have to be forced to be in a box, that's not going to work. And we need to improve those numbers. And I think if we look at art as therapy, if we look at poetry as therapy, pets as therapy, I think we are going to do better if we just allow ourselves to problem solve with whatever works first before we make that harder step of doing something different. And really quickly, I wanted to add, this has nothing to do with Asian American population in general. It has to do with people in general. My dissertation when I was in grad school was looking at the mother-daughter relationship and attachment style and seeing how that changes or doesn't change sexual behavior, like how early on it happens or doesn't happen. So I had all these big theories, I had my data. Turns out I had to scrap my theories. What turns out to be the biggest determinant of making good decisions, so it's not just about sexual relationships, it's about making good decisions, informed decisions, knowing who you are, was the willingness of the mother to listen, talk to, and problem solve and read together. Yes, my dissertation about that topic, but anything important. So it wasn't really the attachment style, it wasn't socioeconomic status, it wasn't neighborhood, it was literally a mother's invitation to have a conversation with her daughter that made the huge difference. So I'll leave you that because I haven't thought about my dissertation in a while, but listening to this, I'm like, we just need connection, and we need to know that we're accepted, whether it's talking about AP Spanish or AP English or lab work or what to wear or what to do at the end of the year, right? So.
Awesome. I'm just going to close this out by saying that, we've talked about the generational gap, and when we're talking about two generations, there are two generations involved. And so I've kind of spoken a lot about being the younger generation, and I'm going to close this out by kind of speaking to the older generation or to my parents, which is when I was kind of actively working through talking about mental health with them, I came to this acute sense of awareness that I was worried that my parents would think that they had failed if they found out that their child was struggling. And I think for a lot of immigrant families, immigrant parents who kind of came here with nothing or close to nothing, if you have a child, then, I'm not a parent, but I would assume you care very much for the well-being of your child. And so I was very terrified that my parents were gonna think that they had failed in some way because I was struggling. I don't know if this is a commonly experienced thing, but and I think listening to kind of their stories and about how they had struggled to kind of get me to where we are today, and then feeling like realizing that this was kind of like a mutual attempt for a parent and child to protect each other. And a lot of the silence that comes from the youth may also come from wanting to protect their parents from their child struggling. But if there's anything I wish that my parents knew, is that I don't think that they've failed just because their child is struggling with mental health, and it doesn't make them an inherently or fundamentally bad parent. No. It doesn't mean that they've messed up, because we are products of our parents, but we're also products of our environment and in a very rapidly changing world. And so, when it comes to the question of what do we do about that, I think this exhibition is very aptly named, which is, bringing the noise, making noise, and taking that first step to start having these conversations and continue to have these conversations so that we continue to create space for ourselves, for our voices, for our experiences, and start changing some of those statistics so they're not so sad anymore. Yeah. I think we're going to take a few minutes to do a Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to share right now.
Speak up.
I have a question.
Yes.
This one is for Millie. Millie, you've worked with Make Noise Today for 3 years now?
Yes.
And as you know, we empower and provide a platform for Asian American youth. What can we do better now that you're moving on? Congratulations, and being accepted and committing to Yale, by the way.
Whoa.
So what can we do better as you go on to your next year?
Wow. Michael just hitting me with the hard question right after that. Okay. First of all, I have to say, Make Noise Today is such a family, and we are I've never experienced so much support from such amazing people. I'm really just so thankful to have Michael, to have Tanya, to have Michelle, to have Nisha. So I could just continue. So many people. Nanju, oh my gosh, yeah. And really, I've really enjoyed this experience of being an intern here. And if you're not familiar, Make Noise Today was created in response to the anti-Asian hate crimes that occurred during COVID, and sort of it's been a platform to uplift voices of AAPI youth and to talk about these issues that aren't being talked about. The reason why we're all here today is because Make Noise Today and all these other amazing people and groups recognized the need to talk about AAPI youth mental health. And I think in terms of looking to the future for Make Noise Today in specific, I just can't wait to, share this group with more people and to share this with more AAPI youth in specific. If we can reach even more teen audiences to talk about this stuff, because I realize that a lot of my friends are still really closed off about talking about this, and they think that it's sort of awkward or, like Dr. Powell said, uncomfortable. So helping with the opening up process and doing our best as a group and as a collective. All of you can have this power to just reach out to AAPI youth or see if there's a way that you can become a mentor or become a friend or someone who helps someone out there, just in general, to spread the word about this and to talk more about these conversations, but also give access to resources like Make Noise Today, where there's actively being there's actively work being done and opportunities being given for AAPI youth to talk about these things and to sort of uplift these voices. But yeah, I don't know if that's not really a thing you need to work on, but yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, right there.
Yeah, for either Ian or Millie, or maybe both of you, you both talked about the difficulty there is for some of your peers and friends to also talk about this. The fact that you all have this language now, I wish I had that language in high school and college. How do you help your friends, your peers, who express a struggle in being able to talk about this, to open up and feel like they have that permission?
Do you want to start?
I'm good, whatever you want.
Okay, well, I can start. I think, that's a very good question. I think there's a lot of things, we can do, but something that I like to do is just be compassionate and be open to the realization that not everyone is lucky or privileged enough to have access to these kinds of resources, to the language, and like Dr. Pal said, therapy is not just like therapy, it's talking to anyone, being able to talk to anyone, whether that's even to like a notebook or to a book or to a TV screen, whatever it is, being able to just help them get the words out there. And so that might be me offering to be that space for someone to talk to, or giving, offering them. I like to recommend books to people, but that's just me. I'm like a local book dealer among my friends. But just being there to listen and offering them your compassion, your kindness, offering them support, knowing that this is a big step that they're taking if that is something that they really struggled with before. I think that's a good first step to go.
Yeah, totally agree with Ian, and I think another thing that Ian shared earlier with me that was really powerful is something that's worked for her and her friends is like sort of just communicating what you need, or setting that boundary in terms of like, I need to rant and I want you to, after this, just give me a hug, or I need to rant and I want you to give me advice right now, or just communicating what it is you want. And maybe when you start to set that precedent, friends who are less open to talking about these issues can start to follow that precedent and see if it works for them. And maybe they'll come to you one day and be like, hey, I need to rant and I just want you to give me a hug. I think another thing that I wanted to say about talking to my friends is sort of establishing mental health as something that we can just talk about, like a regular lunch topic. Because mental health isn't just like all of the bad side of things and all the struggles that we go through, but also the good side of things. And mental health at its core is ensuring that we're feeling good, and that even when we're feeling bad, we have the tools to recognize that. So it's sort of this term that I think is thrown around, but at the end of the day, a lot of Asian youth don't really know what it means. So when you sort of take away the scariness of it and just be like, how was your day? Tell me honestly, like one thing that was really sucky about it, or just like just checking in, and sort of like, I think sometimes when you're really close to someone, you can sense that they're not having a good day, you can check in, and that's just the easiest part of it, like very easy part of it. And yeah, I think that's mainly how I connect with my friends.
I have a comment that I thought was extremely astute is you mentioned talking with the parents and setting those boundaries and saying what you need. That's something I never grappled with, and realized that in a relationship, that kind of communication of all kinds of relationships is extremely important. I think you've got huge tools at a much younger age than many of us ever did. So take that further.
Write a book.
We're waiting for Ian's book.
Any other questions? Great. No, thank you, panel. And thank you, Ian, for participating.
You were great.
I hope everyone, got something out of this, and and hopefully it jumpstarts this conversation with your family, your child, or your parents. As you know, communication starts from the home, and one of our partners, actually, Parents Are Human, they have a card game. So underneath your seat, there's a small card, just an example of
Oh, that's what that is.
really icebreakers that children or parents can have with each other to really open up that conversation. There's a table at the end of the exhibition where you can check out a little more of their games. They actually have it in 15 languages. Wow, you know, from Vietnamese, Cantonese, Philippine, Tagalog, excuse me, Spanish, so on and so forth. Check out that table. Obviously, TeachAAPI is here as well. Thank you for your support. And I think from here, I want to do, you know, as they say, it takes a village. So I do want to thank the immediate Make Noise Today team, as well as everyone else who worked on this exhibition, and that's Beryl, Calvin, Jeffrey, Jagesh, Josh, Joyce, Ken, Matthew Carter, Michelle Park, Nanjushi, Nisha, Sam Lowe, Stacy Liu, and of course, Tanya Rocco. That's the end of our event. Please visit the Memorial Care activity to possibly win some merch. We're going to have a small reception in the corner, and then at I think around 7:45, as you go right down through those doors, Lincoln Park is actually hosting movies at the park. They're showing Raya and the Last Dragon for their kickoff to AAPI Heritage Month. So thank you very much.
I seriously thought this had to do with the mics.
I know, what was this for?